Donald Trump has for half a century employed his wealth to extricate himself from various difficulties. Discovered indiscretions led to hush money, while contracted parties left unpaid were overwhelmed with legal expenses, and accusations of deception were met with the procurement of high-priced legal counsel. For 50 years, this particular strategy had never failed him. Indeed, he had never crossed paths with an attorney whose financial resources he could not utterly crush. That dynamic shifted when a public defender from Texas appeared on ABC News, armed with 6 dossiers and zero interest in reaching a settlement. By the broadcast's conclusion, Trump would confess on national television to actions that his $2,000 an hour legal team had spent decades working to conceal. That specific video segment would be presented in 3 different courtrooms within a month, and one phrase, "that is just smart business," would haunt him permanently. To understand what drove him to articulate that statement, you truly need to hear the details. The disrespect began even before the opening query. The ABC News venue was intentionally organized for a direct confrontation, outfitted with 2 individual podiums, a desk for the moderator, and an audience consisting of 200 people chosen to mirror the American populace and the legal framework. This gathering included attorneys, law students, former public defenders, several individuals who had been wrongfully convicted and later exonerated, alongside everyday citizens randomly placed throughout who had their own direct interactions with the justice system. David Muir was positioned at the center of the stage, ready to facilitate what ABC was promoting as Justice in America, a national conversation. The broadcasting network had committed to a substantial exploration concerning legal adherence, responsibility, and the actual mechanics of the judicial system. Donald Trump, however, possessed entirely different goals. "Before we get started," he declared, inclining toward his microphone with the certainty of an individual who had never encountered a legal dispute he could not afford to triumph in, "allow me to just say something regarding my adversary this evening." He indicated Crockett with a slight dismissing motion of his hand, remarking that she is a public defender hailing from Texas, which is very pleasant, very sweet. He chuckled, looking toward the assembled audience as if anticipating they would participate in the humor. "I have utilized the services of the most exceptional lawyers globally, the absolute elite. Roy Cohn was the most outstanding attorney who ever lived, a fact everyone acknowledged, and he was accessible to me. What a brilliant mind. What? My current legal team sits at the zenith of their profession, every single one of them. These are individuals who are educated at the finest institutions, who bill thousands of dollars hourly, and who have never lost any litigation of consequence." He turned back to face Crockett, sneering that she functions as a public defender, which signifies, let us be completely transparent, that if she possessed real skill, she would be employed by a legitimate law firm earning significant income. "Instead, you are legal counsel for criminals who lack the financial means for anyone superior," he remarked, shrugging, before adding that he had better lawyers bringing him refreshments. Seated in the front row, a public defender seated in the front row, a public defender from Chicago, though Trump was unaware of that fact, fixed her gaze on him with absolute contempt. David Muir cleared his throat, suggesting that perhaps they should commence with the opening statements. "Mr. President." "I am merely establishing accurate expectations, David," Trump replied, dismissing the moderator's suggestion with a wave of his hand. "Everyone needs to comprehend exactly who we are dealing with here. I am a professional businessman who has collaborated with the most prominent legal minds in the country, whereas she is affiliated with Legal Aid," he stated, the final words sounding as though they tasted awful. "This is not an equitable match, but I will make an effort to go easy on her," he announced, leaning back and appearing pleased with his initial broadside. Crockett had neither adjusted her position nor offered any visible reaction. She remained standing at her podium with her hands gently folded, her expression calm and nearly serene. It was the characteristic expression of a woman who had previously heard far worse remarks from more important individuals and had survived the experience. "Congresswoman Crockett," David Muir stated, asking if she would care to offer a response. Crockett inclined slightly toward her microphone, and when she began speaking, her tone was composed, deliberate, and almost gentle. Thank you very much for that candid assessment regarding my chosen career, Mr. President. I sincerely appreciate you being so forthright about your actual views on the legal system. She paused momentarily, acknowledging he was accurate that she served as a public defender for 6 years within Dallas. You are indeed correct that public defenders do not bill clients $2,000 an hour. We do not operate luxury vehicles or sport designer clothing, and we do not occupy corner offices within skyscrapers in Manhattan. So I am pleased that we can find agreement on that point, she smiled. But I suspect you might be fundamentally confused about what public defenders actually do, so allow me to explain. Furthermore, if you do not object, I have some inquiries regarding your personal history with attorneys, specifically focusing on why you have required such a vast quantity of them. Approximately 40 minutes before the broadcast began, the atmosphere in Trump's private green room had been characterized by triumphant confidence. "This entire event is going to be magnificent," Trump declared, adjusting his necktie in the mirror, noting that they were sending a public defender to engage him in debate. His campaign manager was scrolling through briefing information on a digital tablet, mentioning that Congresswoman Crockett is actually quite proficient in cross-examination techniques. She makes her living defending actual criminals, people who cannot afford legitimate lawyers, Trump stated, smoothing down his hair. "Do you understand what that signifies to me? It indicates she lacked the ability to succeed in the real world, couldn't make the grade at a major firm, and couldn't establish her own client base, so she accepted the government position because it was all she could secure," he concluded. "Sir, public defenders are actually extremely well trained," the manager attempted to interject. "They are mostly losers," Trump interrupted, stating that he had observed them in courtrooms appearing with their small folders and inexpensive suits, mumbling through their presentations, and then my attorneys totally destroy them every single time. He made these remarks while turning away from the mirror, clearly satisfied with his own reflection. "5 minutes is all I require this evening. 5 minutes and she will be completely overwhelmed by the depth of the situation." Eric Trump, who was hovering near the exit door, nodded his head enthusiastically in agreement, stating she didn't possess a chance because his father had the greatest lawyers globally, the absolute finest. Trump nodded, recalling that Roy Cohn had taught him everything: attack, 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 never concede anything, force them to substantiate every single detail, and even when they successfully prove it, deny it regardless. Trump smiled at that recollection, noting that is how you achieve victory and how he has historically always won. His campaign manager exchanged a highly concerned expression with the communications director, yet neither of them voiced what they were thinking. They were fully aware that Crockett had spent 6 years cross-examining individuals, exposing falsehoods and dismantling narratives that did not withstand scrutiny. They knew she had accomplished this in actual courtrooms where the consequences involved life and death decisions. She had done so against opposing prosecutors who possessed virtually unlimited state resources in front of various judges who expected her to fail. But Trump possessed no interest in listening to such concerns, just as he never did. 5 minutes, he reiterated, and then everyone will witness exactly what transpires when you send a mere public defender to execute a real lawyer's duties. 4 floors below, located in a significantly smaller preparation room, Jasmine Crockett was not analyzing policy documents. Rather, she was reviewing previous legal depositions. "The Free Yield case," she quietly murmured, flipping through a file concerning a 1990 cabinet manufacturing company owed $400,000 that ultimately settled for $70,000 after Friel's business collapsed from overwhelming legal costs. She placed that one aside and selected another file regarding the Tesoro Corporation, drywall contractors who were owed $1.2 million in unpaid invoices. That case dragged on for 4 years and was finally resolved for 30 cents on the dollar after 3 of the subcontracting businesses went out of operation. Another folder she reviewed concerned O'Brien Painting, a family-owned business where 3 generations performed work on Trump Tower and were stiffed out of $150,000. The father suffered a major stroke during the ongoing litigation, and the son assumed control, eventually accepting $50,000 just to make the legal battle cease. Her chief of staff, Marcus Chen, observed from the doorway, asking exactly how many of these files existed. Thousands, Crockett answered without lifting her gaze from the page. I have specifically selected the ones possessing the strongest documentation, those where we have actual depositions, official court records, and sworn testimony. I have chosen the instances where the underlying pattern is undeniably clear. What exactly is that pattern? Crockett finally looked up to inquire, her expression remaining calm, though there was an underlying element that was not quite anger, but something colder and much more focused. The consistent pattern is that he identifies small contractors, people who desperately need the employment and are enthusiastic about working on a prominent Trump project. They execute the job, they do it well, and then when the moment to receive payment arrives, he offers them a mere fraction of what he legally owes them. He offers 20 cents on the dollar, perhaps 30 if they are fortunate, and when they refuse that offer, he instructs them to file a lawsuit against him. He is fully aware they cannot afford to sue, knowing that even if they eventually win, which can take several years, the associated legal fees will destroy them financially. Consequently, they either accept the extremely lowball offer or they go totally bankrupt attempting to fight him, she explained while closing the folder. He refers to this as negotiation and brilliant business practice, but there exists another term for utilizing your superior power to crush individuals who possess no means to fight back. What is that term? Marcus inquired. In criminal law, we categorize it as extortion, while in civil law, we define it as abuse of process. She stood up, straightened her suit jacket, and declared that this evening they were going to call it a direct confession. Marcus frowned at this statement, asking if she genuinely believed he would actually admit to such actions. Crockett smiled, although it was not a warm expression, and remarked that he would not be able to help himself. He is immensely proud of this behavior and genuinely believes it demonstrates he is smart. He has been actively boasting about this practice in legal depositions for decades. He characterizes it as just good business and explains how the game is played, not even grasping that it is morally wrong. All I must do is ask the precise questions in the correct sequence, and he will tell the entire nation exactly who he is. She picked up her folders, 6 of them in total, each one carefully tabbed and color-coded. He operates under the belief that public defenders are pushovers and that we are the attorneys who lack the talent to succeed anywhere else. He has absolutely no conception of what we actually do. What do you actually do? Marcus asked, as Crockett proceeded toward the exit. We cross-examine individuals who lie professionally for a living, we systematically expose narratives that do not add up, and we fight every single day against a legal system deliberately designed to crush our specific clients. She paused momentarily at the threshold and remarked that Donald Trump is not the most powerful individual she has ever squared off against in a courtroom, just simply the loudest one. Back on the stage, Crockett was in the process of explaining the actual role of public defenders to the audience and Trump. Allow me to provide you with some insight into my average caseload, she stated, her voice maintaining its calm and conversational quality. When I worked as a public defender in Dallas, I personally managed over 200 cases per year. That figure is not a typographical error. It included 200 cases involving murder, assault, drug charges, and instances where my clients faced decades of potential prison time. She looked directly at Trump and asked him how many cases his lawyers, the ones who bill at $2,000 an hour, typically handle annually, estimating perhaps 10 or 15. They have vast teams of associate attorneys to conduct research, paralegals to file the necessary motions, and investigators hired to uncover evidence. I possessed myself a stack of case files and clients who were desperately depending on me to be the sole entity standing between them and a system that desired to crush them. Trump shifted visibly at his podium and remarked, "That is very touching." However, Crockett interrupted him, stating that she was not yet finished, and the sudden sharpness in her voice caused him to cease speaking. She reminded him that he had said public defenders are lawyers who could not make it anywhere else. Allow me to tell you what public defenders actually do. We work significantly longer hours than your attorneys for only a small fraction of the pay. We manage substantially more cases with vastly fewer resources, opposing prosecutors who have the entire structural weight of the government supporting them. We fight, and quite frequently we lose because the legal system is intentionally designed for us to lose. Nevertheless, we fight anyway because that is what the United States Constitution absolutely requires. Every person is entitled to a defense, even people who cannot afford $2,000 an hour, even individuals who have been totally abandoned by everyone else, and even people whom the rest of society has completely written off. She paused briefly to tell him that his lawyers specialize in making problems vanish, paying off accusers, burying damning evidence inside NDAs, and dragging cases out until the other party is bankrupt. That is not the practice of law. That is warfare conducted by alternative means, a form of war that only the wealthy can afford to engage in. Public defenders stand up in open court and fight utilizing nothing but the underlying facts and the established law. We do not possess massive amounts of money or teams of associates. We just possess the truth and the Constitution. She looked at Trump with an expression resembling pity, noting that he had spent his entire existence surrounded by lawyers who told him precisely what he desired to hear and protected him from facing any consequences. You have never previously faced an attorney who actually wanted the truth to be exposed. She smiled until this evening. A woman positioned in the audience raised her hand. She was perhaps 50, dressed in professional attire, and had the tired eyes of someone who had witnessed far too much in life. David Muir nodded toward her to speak, and she stated that her name was Rebecca Friel Morrison. My father was Edward Friel Jr., who owned a cabinet manufacturing company located in Philadelphia. It was a third-generation business that my grandfather originally started and my father successfully built, and I was intended to take it over one day. Her voice remained steady, but there was a distinct tremor underneath it as she recounted that in 1988, her father secured the contract of a lifetime. It was for Donald Trump's Taj Mahal casino, $400,000 to construct the bases for the slot machines, making it the largest project they had ever received. My father was incredibly proud, so much so that he hired extra workers, purchased new equipment, and worked his crew overtime hours in order to meet the strict deadline. She looked directly at Trump, stating he delivered the entire project on time and within budget, presenting beautiful work, and then Trump absolutely refused to pay. Trump began to speak up, but she continued over him, saying he offered only $70,000, which was less than 20% of what was legally owed to the company. When he refused that meager amount, you explicitly instructed him to sue you, fully aware that he could not afford to, and knowing that even if he eventually won, the legal expenses would financially destroy him. He filed a lawsuit anyway because he genuinely believed in the system and believed that if you performed high-quality work and kept your promise, you would receive what you were owed. Her voice cracked slightly as she described the arduous 3-year lawsuit filled with constant depositions, legal motions, and intentional delays. Your $2,000 an hour lawyers filed motion after motion, dragged the entire process out, and made it as expensive as humanly possible for him. My father suffered a major heart attack in the second year of the case purely due to the immense stress of watching everything he had built slip away because a billionaire simply decided he did not feel like paying his bills. He died in 1994, still fighting that legal battle, still believing he would eventually receive justice. She wiped her eyes and stated that they settled the case after he passed away because her mother could not endure it any longer. We received $100,000, exactly 1/4 of what we were owed, and were forced to sign an NDA stating we would never speak about it publicly. But you know what? I am completely done being quiet, and I am finished protecting the man who ultimately killed my father. She looked directly at Trump and stated he didn't pull the trigger, but he killed him with lawyers, constant delays, and the utter arrogance of a man who believes he can just take whatever he wants. Consequently, I have just one question for you, Mr. Trump. Just one. Was that $300,000 you saved worth my father's life? The studio fell into absolute silence, and Trump's face had turned red as he claimed that he could not possibly remember every individual contractor. His name was Edward Friel Jr. Rebecca's voice was like ice, and he had a wife named Mary and 2 daughters. He coached Little League Baseball on weekends, attended church every Sunday, and built beautiful things with his own hands. You utterly destroyed him simply because you possessed the power to do so. Those were nothing more than ordinary business disputes, Trump responded defensively. However, another strong voice from the audience shouted, he was merely one of thousands. A man stood up, perhaps 60, wearing a work jacket featuring a faded company logo, and introduced himself as James Mitchell. I performed electrical work on Trump Tower in the 80s, and our company was owed $180,000. We ultimately received only $45,000 after 2 years of legal fighting, and my business partner committed suicide 6 months later. Another person stood up, a significantly younger woman named Maria Santos, stating that her mother cleaned rooms at the Trump Plaza Hotel for 7 years. When it went into bankruptcy, she was owed 3 months of back wages and never received a single dime. Consequently, she is still working at age 74 because she cannot afford to retire. Another individual, Robert Chen, stated his family's restaurant did catering for Trump events held in Atlantic City and was owed $35,000. He told us to file a lawsuit, but we could not afford to, and we closed our business 2 years later. Another person and yet another stood up. 6 people were now standing with 6 specific stories of work performed, significant money owed, and lives completely destroyed. 6 faces looked directly at Donald Trump with the accumulated grief and pain of decades. And then a 7th individual stood up. He was an older man, perhaps 70, wearing a worn suit that had clearly been his best one once, and introduced himself as William Patterson. I owned a plumbing company located in New Jersey and performed work on 3 different Trump properties in the late 1980s, including hotels and casinos, the works. His voice was gruff but remained steady as he stated they were legally owed $340,000. I had 12 employees, good men, skilled workers possessing families who were depending on them for survival. He looked directly at Trump and recounted that he offered only $85,000, explicitly stating it was take it or leave it. When I said no, you told me, and I will never forget this as long as I live. Bill, you seem like a very nice guy, but I've got 50 high-priced lawyers and you've got, what, a brother-in-law who passed the bar exam? Take the money, at least you'll have something. He shook his head slowly, saying he did not take the lowball offer because he genuinely believed in the system and that performing honest work deserves honest pay. 3 years later, my company was completely gone and my employees, those 12 families, all had to find other employment. Was living in his car. I finally got $120,000 in the eventual settlement, which was less than half of what we were owed, and after paying all the legal fees, I had about $60,000 left over. That is exactly what I received for 3 years of fighting, for losing my entire company, and for watching my employees' lives completely fall apart around them. He pointed directly at Trump, saying he cost him absolutely everything and did not even know his name until this very night. An 8th person stood up, a young woman maybe in her early 30s who introduced herself as Jennifer Huang. I am an attorney now, but my story actually starts with my parents, she said, her voice trembling slightly. My parents owned a small landscaping company located in Queens after immigrating here from Taiwan in 1975. They built that entire company from nothing, utilizing 1 truck and 1 lawnmower, working 18 hours every day until they possessed something real. In 1991, they secured a contract to perform landscaping for a specific Trump property for $75,000, the largest project they had ever had. My mother cried when they signed that contract, thinking it signified that they had finally made it in America. She wiped her eyes and remarked, "You paid them exactly $15,000, which is 20 cents on the dollar." When my father complained, your people explicitly told him he was lucky to receive anything at all, and that if he caused trouble, they would report him to immigration authorities. My father had been a legal citizen for 15 years, but he was absolutely terrified of lawyers, the government, and powerful white men in suits. Consequently, he accepted the $15,000 and never spoke about it again. He passed away in 2008, never seeing what I ultimately became. He never knew that I went to law school purely because of what happened to him, and he never knew that I have spent the last 10 years performing pro bono legal work for immigrants cheated by people exactly like you. She looked directly at Trump with cold fury and stated, He did not just steal money from her parents, he stole their dignity. You made them feel small and totally powerless in a country they loved and had worked their entire lives to belong to. My father's name was Chen Wei Huang. He was a good man who performed good work, and you treated him like he was absolute nothing. The audience was absolutely silent, and several people were crying. Even David Muir appeared visibly shaken by the testimonies. Trump looked around the room, his expression shifting from defensive to something rapidly approaching panic. "This is all ancient history," he remarked, adding that business is very complicated. "Allow me to ask you a specific question, Mr. President." Crockett's voice cut through the growing chaos, remaining calm and precise. "A very simple question, merely yes or no," she stated, and Trump turned to face her, looking almost grateful for the interruption from the audience. "Have you ever personally refused to pay a contractor the full amount you legally owed them after they had completely finished the work you specifically asked them to perform?" There was a notable silence before he answered, stating that in business you always negotiate, so it is not a simple yes or no question. "Let me rephrase it slightly for you." Crockett's voice was patient, nearly gentle, the characteristic voice of a lawyer who had asked this specific question 1,000 times previously. "Have you ever refused to pay someone the full amount you explicitly agreed to pay them after they had completed the work you asked them to do, yes or no?" After a long, drawn-out pause, Trump admitted that sometimes the work was not up to standard. "So yes, the answer is technically yes." Crockett nodded at this admission and asked a quick follow-up. "When contractors complained that you were not paying them, did you ever explicitly tell them to sue you?" "If they had a problem, they certainly could go to court," Trump responded defensively. "Did you ever say, and I am directly quoting from a deposition in the Friel case, 'Sue me, I have more lawyers than you, you'll go completely bankrupt before I pay you a dime'?" Trump's mouth opened and closed as he claimed not to recall that specific statement. "I have the actual transcript right here," Crockett said, holding up a document open to page 47. "Mr. Trump, did you tell Mr. Friel to sue you?" she asked. And he admitted he may have said something like that. "Did you explicitly tell him he would go bankrupt before you paid him?" she pressed. And he claimed he was simply making a point regarding the legal system. She set the document back down on her podium and declared, "You told a man who performed $400,000 of work for you that you would not pay him. You explicitly told him if he tried to make you pay, you would utterly destroy him with legal fees, and then you proceeded to do exactly that. His company went bankrupt, his health failed, and he died." She looked directly at Trump and asked if that action constitutes negotiation or smart business practice. Trump's face had gone from red to something approaching purple as he shouted, "This whole thing was a setup. You brought these people here and staged this entire scene." "I did not bring anyone, Mr. President. ABC invited specific audience members who applied on their own accord. They have been waiting for decades for someone to ask you these very questions. These are just disgruntled former contractors looking to get money," Trump argued. "They already received their money, pennies on the dollar after you crushed them financially with legal expenses," Crockett retorted. "They are not present here today for money. They are here for the truth." Crockett picked up another document and stated, "Let me ask you regarding your overall legal strategy, Mr. President. You have been personally involved in over 4,000 distinct lawsuits. Is that figure correct?" "I am a professional businessman. Lawsuits happen," he replied dismissively. 4,000 lawsuits is roughly equivalent to one lawsuit every 3 days for your entire adult life, she calculated, tilting her head slightly. "Does that figure seem normal to you?" she asked. And he responded that when you are successful, people sue you. Actually, in approximately 2,000 of those specific cases, you were the plaintiff suing other people, like small businesses, contractors, and even cities, often demanding millions of dollars. She pulled up a summary and noted that in another 1,500 cases, you were personally sued for non-payment, breach of contract, and outright fraud. "Those were all ordinary business disputes," he interrupted. "Let me ask you directly, Mr. President," Crockett said, her voice still calm but with underlying steel now. Was it your deliberate, intentional strategy to refuse payment to contractors, knowing they could not afford to sue you, knowing that even if they won, the legal fees would destroy them? Was that your actual business model? That is not, I never, Trump stammered, visibly flustered. Let me read you something, she said, picking up another document citing a 1992 article from the Wall Street Journal. It directly quotes former business associates stating the delays and underpayments are part of a calculated business strategy employed by Mr. Trump's companies. She looked up and repeated, a calculated business strategy, not accidents or ordinary disputes, but a deliberate choice to utilize your money and your lawyers to crush people who could not fight back. That is fake news, Trump insisted, claiming the Wall Street Journal twists things. Let me try another source, Crockett said, picking up a different document referencing a 2016 USA Today investigation. They found 3,500 lawsuits involving you and your companies over 4 decades and interviewed dozens of individual contractors. The quote explicitly stated that the consistent physical resemblance of repeated instances of non-payment strongly suggests that stiffing contractors was standard operating procedure, not an aberration. She set the document down and repeated, standard operating procedure. The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and official court records from dozens of cases all describe the exact same pattern. She pulled out one more document, noting this one was from him, quoting a 2007 deposition regarding unpaid bills to a catering company. The attorney asked if it was his standard practice to pay contractors less than the legally agreed amount, and your sworn answer was, I pay what I think the work is worth. If they don't like it, they can sue me. She then asked if you personally considered that fair, and your answer was, I consider it smart. Crockett looked up directly at Trump and repeated, you consider it smart? That is what you stated under oath. Is that accurate? Trump's face was flushed as he argued that in business you always negotiate. Is that accurate, Mr. President? Do you consider it smart to pay people less than you legally agreed to pay them? If the work isn't up to standard, he added as a necessary caveat. Edward Friel's work was up to standard, and you never previously claimed otherwise. The cabinets were delivered on time, within budget, and exactly as specified. You simply decided not to pay, and when he complained, you explicitly told him to sue you. She gestured at the assembled audience, noting Chen Huang's landscaping work was exactly as contracted. You paid him 20 cents on the dollar and explicitly threatened him with immigration authorities. William Patterson's work was up to standard, as you personally admitted during the settlement negotiations. The work was fine, you just did not want to pay. Consequently, let me ask you again, was it your deliberate strategy to refuse payment for satisfactory work, knowing small contractors could not afford to fight you legally? Trump's voice rose dramatically as he declared, that's just smart business. Everyone does it. You do not pay full price if you can negotiate. You do not give money away. That is how the game is played, any businessman will tell you. He abruptly stopped speaking, and the studio fell totally silent. Crockett let the moment hang in the air before slowly repeating, that's just smart business. You do not pay full price if you can negotiate. She said this while turning to face the audience, to Rebecca Friel Morrison, still standing with tears on her cheeks, to James Mitchell, whose business partner took his own life, to Maria Santos, whose mother still works at 74, to all of them. She asked, did you hear that? That's just smart business. That is his entire defense, his explanation for utterly destroying your lives, your families, and your companies. He genuinely thinks it makes him smart. She turned directly back to Trump, saying, Mr. President, you just confessed on national television. You admitted that refusing to pay people, crushing them with legal fees, and destroying their businesses and lives was your deliberate strategy, your definition of smart business. That is not what I said, Trump protested vehemently, now calling this ridiculous and a witch calling this ridiculous and a witch hunt, claiming ABC and everyone present were fake news. Mr. President, I do not have to stand here and be interrogated by a mere public defender. His voice cracked with anger. I am the former President of the United States. I have built massive buildings and created thousands of jobs. What have you done besides defend criminals who cannot afford anyone better? Crockett waited patiently until he was entirely finished, then spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent studio. I have indeed defended people accused of serious crimes, many of whom were completely innocent and railroaded by a legal system that assumes guilt before a trial ever begins. Many were people exactly like the ones standing in this audience tonight, individuals crushed by someone possessing more money and more lawyers. And yes, I have defended people who are actually guilty, because that is what the United States Constitution requires. Everyone gets a defense. That is what separates us from dictatorships, and that is precisely what separates true justice from sheer power. She looked directly at Trump and said she had never once defended someone who bragged about destroying small businesses or someone who laughed about crushing contractors with legal fees and labeled it smart business to take food off people's tables. You want to know the actual difference between your expensive lawyers and public defenders, she asked. Your lawyers are employed to protect you from the actual consequences of what you have done. Public defenders are employed to protect ordinary people from being destroyed by men like you. Trump's face utterly contorted, and he yelled that he did not have to listen to this another second. He ripped the microphone completely from his lapel, declaring this was a setup from the very beginning, with planted people and rigged questions. He pointed directly at Crockett and called her nothing, a total nobody, just a... He stopped himself abruptly, but everyone present heard the exact word he was reaching for. Everyone knew how that sentence was supposed to end. Just a what, Mr. President? Crockett's voice was soft as she challenged him directly to finish his sentence. Trump's mouth worked, but no sound came out, so he turned and stormed toward the stage exit. His handlers rushed from the wings, attempting to intercept him as he yelled that he was done and this entire event was a disgrace. I do not answer to public defenders. He pushed past his assembled aides and disappeared through the stage door. His footsteps echoed loudly in the sudden absolute silence as Crockett stood entirely alone on the stage. The 6 witnesses were still standing in the audience. Rebecca Friel Morrison, James Mitchell, Maria Santos, Robert Chen, and the others, all of them watching, all of them waiting. Crockett turned to face the camera directly and recounted that he called her just a public defender and stated she wasn't in his league. He said he had better lawyers bringing him coffee. She straightened her jacket. Here is what he has never understood. Public defenders do not protect criminals. We protect the United States Constitution. We protect the fundamental principle that everyone deserves a fair shot, and we protect people from being crushed by the powerful. She looked over at the empty podium where Trump had previously stood, noting his lawyers spent 50 years protecting him from consequences. They made his problems disappear, bearing the absolute truth under NDAs, settlements, and endless intentional delays. My entire job as a public defender was to make sure the truth came out and to fight for people who absolutely could not fight for themselves, to stand up against a system designed to crush them. She turned directly to the witnesses still standing in the audience. Edward Friel performed good work, delivered it on time and on budget, and absolutely deserved to be paid. He deserved to see his grandchildren, and he deserved better than to die fighting a billionaire who genuinely thought the rules did not apply to him. James Mitchell's partner deserved to see his business survive, and Maria Santos's mother deserves to be able to retire. Robert Chen's family deserved to keep their restaurant. They did not lose because they did anything wrong. They lost because they ran directly into a man who believes smart business means taking whatever you want from whoever you can. She looked directly at the camera and said, "Tonight that man confessed on live television. He told the whole country that crushing people with legal fees was his actual strategy, his definition of smart business, and he was proud of it. He still does not understand that it is fundamentally wrong," she said while picking up her files. "He was right about one specific thing. I am not in his league, and I never wanted to be. I wanted to be in the league of individuals who fight for the powerless and tell the absolute truth, even when it is hard. I firmly believe that justice should be for everyone, not just the people who can afford it." She smiled slightly, remarking, "That is what public defenders do, and tonight I think we did it pretty well." She turned and walked off stage, and behind her the audience began to applaud. First one single person, then 10, then all of them, standing and clapping, some of them crying. Rebecca Friel Morrison was applauding too, tears streaming down her face, knowing her father was finally heard. The broadcast officially concluded at 10:23 p.m. Eastern Time, 67 minutes ahead of schedule. By 10:30, the video clip of Trump's defiant voice saying, "That's just smart business," was everywhere. The hashtag That's Smart Business trended #1 within 20 minutes, and by midnight it had been viewed over 80 million times. By morning it had reached 200 million views, with hashtag Just a Public Defender trending at #2 and hashtag Pay Your Bills at #3. At 11:47 p.m., Trump posted on Truth Social, calling it a total setup with a fake audience and planted questions, declaring a BC dead to him. At 12:15 a.m., he posted that he never said he doesn't pay his bills and that fake news was twisting his words. "I pay everyone, ask anyone," he wrote. At 12:43 a.m., he claimed the contractors in the audience were actually paid actors hired by Democrats and that someone should investigate them. At 1:17 a.m., he clarified that when he said smart business, he meant negotiation, which every businessman does and is not illegal in any way. At 2:04 a.m., he posted he couldn't sleep because he was too angry about the unfair treatment, but insisted they would ultimately win because America sees through the lies. At 2:38 a.m., he called Jasmine Crockett a nobody with a very low IQ who couldn't make it at a real law firm and was a total lightweight. At 3:15 a.m., he wrote he was going to sleep but wanted to be clear that he won tonight and that his lawyers were the best while public defenders were losers. He had posted 37 times by 6 a.m., each successive post angrier than the last, proving Crockett's point more thoroughly than she ever could have herself. At 6:15 a.m., an advisor finally got through to him, warning that every time he said smart business, he was making the situation worse and the lawyers were begging him to stop. Trump's immediate response at 6:23 a.m. was that his lawyers are the best, unlike public defenders who are total losers, and that he knows more about the law than any lawyer. At 6:47 a.m., he claimed he just spoke to his legal team and they agreed he did absolutely nothing wrong because negotiation is perfectly legal. At 7:15 a.m., he posted he was watching the fake news coverage of total lies and asserted he always pays his bills, telling people to ask anyone who matters. The parenthetical phrase would haunt him within hours as it became its own popular hashtag anyone who matters. The morning news shows were entirely unanimous that he had made a confession. One legal analyst on CNN stated plainly and simply that he admitted refusing to pay contractors was a deliberate strategy, which is potentially relevant to multiple ongoing civil cases. Another news anchor who had covered Trump for 8 years said she had never seen him self-destruct like that. She did not even have to push hard, she just asked questions calmly and he told on himself. A commentator observed that the moment those witnesses stood up, the entire event changed from being about politics to real people whose lives were destroyed by a man who called it smart business. On Fox News, the coverage was notably subdued, and no clips of the specific confession were played during their broadcasts. Admitted to not paying people, but then admitted to not paying people, but then awkward silence followed, as even Fox couldn't put a positive spin on the fact that he called crushing people with legal fees smart business. Within 24 hours, the confession had become the most analyzed moment in political television history. Legal experts dissected it frame by frame, and body language analysts examined Trump's posture when he uttered the phrase smart business. Linguists parsed the word's rhythm and the revealing syntax of a man who did not realize he was in the process of confessing. A prominent Harvard law professor told CNN that what is remarkable is that he is clearly proud of it. He is not making an excuse or claiming ignorance. He is explaining his core strategy and genuinely believes that everyone operates this way. She continued, "That is the most damning part. He is not a businessman who sometimes cuts corners, but a sophisticated predator who built an empire on crushing people who could not fight back, and he told the whole country on live television while seemingly expecting them to be impressed by it." The clip was set to various types of music, auto-tuned, remixed, and shared repeatedly across social media platforms. "That's just smart business" became a popular catchphrase utilized ironically whenever someone described obvious exploitation. A landlord raises rent by 300%. That's just smart business. A company cuts healthcare benefits while simultaneously giving executives massive bonuses. That's just smart business. A corporation dumps toxic waste in poor neighborhoods. That's just smart business. The phrase became recognized shorthand for everything wrong with American capitalism, and Trump had handed it directly to his critics, gift-wrapped. The legal consequences arrived significantly faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, three separate law firms announced they were officially reopening specific cases against Trump that had been previously settled under extreme duress. His admission that this was a deliberate strategy changes absolutely everything, one attorney stated, noting they now possess evidence of pattern and practice. Within a single week, the New York Attorney General's office announced it was officially reviewing Trump's statement in connection with ongoing fraud investigations. Within a month, the "That's Just Smart Business" video clip had been played in 3 different courtrooms, where judges cited it directly and opposing counsel quoted it. What Trump thought was a viable defense had become a full confession that followed him everywhere he went. The contractors came forward first, dozens, then hundreds of individual people who had signed NDAs and stayed quiet for decades. Suddenly, they felt permission to tell their stories, and a website appeared called payubills.org that compiled every known case of Trump-stiffing contractors. The list grew longer every single day, and by the end of the month, it documented over 3,500 separate incidents. Law schools requested copies of the original broadcast, with one professor telling the New York Times it was a definitive masterclass in cross-examination techniques. She never raised her voice or argued with him. She just asked the right questions in the right order and let him destroy himself. Public defender offices across the entire country reported a significant surge in job applications from young lawyers who had previously been headed for corporate firms but suddenly wanted to do something that truly mattered. One applicant wrote in her personal statement that she watched that specific broadcast and realized she wanted to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. 3 months after the broadcast, Rebecca Friel Morrison testified before Congress and told her father's story once again. She recounted the contract, the betrayal, the years of fighting, the heart attack, and his death. But this time she added that after the ABC broadcast, she received thousands of messages from people who had the exact same experience. Contractors, small business owners, housekeepers, and caterers all had the identical story. They did the work, did not get paid, and were told to sue when they complained. "My father died genuinely believing he was alone and that he was the only one stupid enough to trust Donald Trump, feeling it was somehow his own fault. He was not alone. He was merely one of thousands, and it was not his fault. It was a deliberate strategy employed by a powerful man to take from the powerless." She told the committee members she was there to ask them to pass the Friel Fair Payment Act. It included greatly enhanced penalties for corporations that systematically underpay contractors and mandatory arbitration timelines so cases cannot be intentionally dragged out for years. It also included vital legal fee protections so small businesses do not go completely bankrupt trying to collect what they are legally owed. "My father cannot be here today, but maybe if we do this right, no one else's father will ever have to die fighting for what they earned." The bill successfully passed the House 6 weeks later, and though it eventually stalled in the Senate, the vital conversation had begun across the country. Something else was happening, something much quieter but no less significant, as small business owners started talking in diners, hardware stores, and union halls. They shared stories they had kept quiet for years regarding the prominent client who didn't pay or the powerful company that crushed them with legal fees. A support group formed online called Stiffed by the Powerful, and within 3 months it possessed 50,000 active members. People who had never previously met discovered they shared the identical experience, the same shame and the same feeling that they had failed somehow, when in reality they had been victims. A former caterer from Atlantic City wrote that for 30 years she thought there was something fundamentally wrong with her for not getting paid. "Now I know it was not me, it was never me, it was him, it was always him." A major class action lawsuit was officially filed against the Trump Organization alleging a pattern and practice of systematic underpayment, with plaintiffs numbering in the hundreds. The "that's just smart business" defense became a unified rallying cry for labor advocates. When the powerful explicitly tell you that exploitation is smart, one organizer stated, they are telling you precisely who they are, so believe them. 6 months after the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett gave the keynote address at the National Public Defender Conference held in Chicago. 2,000 public defenders completely filled the large auditorium and gave her a thunderous standing ovation before she uttered a single word. Many wore T-shirts featuring various message variations, hashtag just a public defender, and some added hashtag who made a billionaire confess, or hashtag your honor. Crockett waited patiently for the prolonged applause to fade, and when she began speaking, her voice was quiet but carried clearly through the large room. "He called us just public defenders," she began, noting he said they were lawyers who could not make it anywhere else and that he had better lawyers bringing him coffee. She smiled and stated she wanted to thank him very much for that, because he reminded the entire country what they actually do. She looked directly at the audience, at the tired eyes, the worn suits, and the stubborn idealism that defined her profession. "We do not do it for the money. God knows we do not do it for the money," she said as immediate laughter rippled through the room. "We do not do it for the prestige or because it is easy. We do it purely because someone has to and because the Constitution demands it. Every person accused of a crime, every single one, deserves someone who will fight for them. We fight against nearly impossible odds, with far too many cases and way too few resources, in courtrooms where the deck is deliberately stacked against our clients. And sometimes, more often than the world ever knows, we win. Not because we are smarter or better funded, but purely because we work harder and care more." She paused to note that Donald Trump spent his life surrounded by lawyers who tell him he is right and make problems disappear. He thought that made them superior to us and meant they were in a totally different league. But here is what he has never understood. There is no league. There are just lawyers who fight purely for power and lawyers who fight for people. Over the vast audience and said, he thought public defender was an insult, but we made it a true badge of honor. He thought we were beneath him, but we showed him we were the ones he should have feared all along. We are the lawyers who are not afraid of powerful people and who ask the extremely hard questions. We do not care about billionaires or corner offices. We care about the truth, justice, and real people who deserve someone in their corner. The truth always comes out," she said, raising her fist and declaring, "We are public defenders, we are not to be dismissed, and we are just getting started." The applause was thunderous and went on for a full 5 minutes, with people crying, cheering, and standing. When it finally faded, one young public defender positioned in the front row called out, asking what was next. Crockett smiled and said, "What's next is we keep fighting every single day in every courtroom for every person who cannot afford anyone else. That is what we do. That is who we are, just public defenders." 1 year after the broadcast, Rebecca Friel Morrison received a small package in the mail containing a framed photograph of the split-screen moment from ABC. It showed Trump red-faced and shouting next to Crockett, who was calm and composed. With it was a handwritten note saying her father performed beautiful work and deserved to be paid, see his grandchildren, and have justice. "We could not give him that, but we gave him the truth," the note read. After 30 years, the whole world finally knows what happened to him and to all of them. The note concluded by saying he was not forgotten and would never be forgotten, thanking Jasmine Crockett for standing up. Rebecca hung the photograph in her living room, right next to a picture of her father, young and smiling in front of his cabinet shop. She touched the glass gently and whispered, "Dad, they finally heard you." He called her just a public defender, but by the end of the night, he had confessed to a 50-year pattern of crushing small businesses and labeled it smart business. The clip has been played in 3 different courtrooms, and the Friel Fair Payment Act is successfully moving through Congress. Public defenders across America have a new answer when someone attempts to dismiss them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who has ever been stiffed by someone with more money. Share it with anyone who has been told they are not in the league of the powerful. Share it with anyone who believes justice should be for everyone. And the next time someone tells you public defenders are second-rate lawyers, remember they are the ones who aren't afraid to ask the hard questions. That's just smart justice.